Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jamie, and I'm a digital associate at The Space. I will give you a visual description. I am a white man in my 30s with floppy brown hair and questionable stubble. Today, I am delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, Funding for Digital Projects with The Space, ACE and Library On. Today, we have three very special guest speakers, Kate Earle, Jill Brown, and John White. This is the final webinar in a series of webinars designed for West Midlands Library Services on how to create your own digital projects. It is my genuine pleasure to introduce you to today's first speaker. Kate Earle, who I am going to spotlight now, joins us from Arts Council England.
Hi everybody, good afternoon.
Perfect. Okay, I'm just going to get your presentation ready. Okay, bear with me 1 second. There we are. Over to you, Kate.
Lovely, thanks Jamie. So hi afternoon, I'm Kate Earle. I'm sure some of you know me already, and I'm Arts Council's Relationship Manager for the Midlands for libraries. As a visual description, I'm a white woman in my early 40s. I've got glasses and my hair looks brown on this monitor, but in real life it's increasingly grey. So today I'm going to talk through Arts Council's funding for public libraries via National Lottery project grants. Don't worry about taking notes or reading all the detail on the slides. This is an overview, but everything that I say today can be found on Arts Council's website in full detail. Next slide, please.
There we go.
So a few basics about project grants. It is an open access funding stream with no deadlines. You can submit an application whenever you're ready to. Applications can be made by organisations or individuals, and projects can last up to 3 years. There's a minimum ask of £1,000. Our definition of a project is a time-limited activity that allows people to experience or take part in artistic, cultural, or creative work that involves one or more of our disciplines. And we'll come on to exceptions to this definition for public libraries next. Next slide. So here are our Arts Council disciplines. You can see that we can fund any applicant, including libraries, for activity relating to these art forms and disciplines on the slide. In addition, we currently have a time-limited priority. It's in place to prioritise quality applications that contribute to the universal library offers, which are also on the slide there, and only public libraries are eligible to apply for this priority. It means that in addition to the above art forms, we've got a focus on which have a focus on cultural and creativity. Public libraries are also eligible to apply that projects that contribute to the 4 universal library offers, and that includes those without an obvious creative focus. So this means that the health and wellbeing, information, digital, and even non-creative aspects of the universal library offers can be applied for under this time-limited priority. If you'd like to apply using the priority, you need to tick the box when you apply for a project grant application. Next slide, please. So briefly, what we can't apply for. We can't fund work that won't reach people in England, projects that have already happened or started, or ongoing business running costs or formal education. We don't cover cinema or fashion, but we can support film or video as elements of wider projects. And on to the next slide. This is a look at the 4 universal library offers and some ideas of what you could apply for. And you can see that digital projects and approaches could fit under any of these universal library offers. So here's a few examples. These lists aren't exhaustive, obviously. I'm happy to have a conversation about any ideas that you're thinking about. So under the cultural and creativity ULO, projects can provide artistic and cultural experience to stimulate and entertain, spark curiosity and imagination, or encourage participation and skills development. There's a few ideas in the table there. For the reading universal library offers, libraries can apply for projects that encourage reading for pleasure, particularly for new or reluctant readers, or that broaden the choices for existing readers. But as a public library service applicant, your reading project doesn't have to have creative or cultural aims and outcomes. And there's some examples there that show that reading projects could focus on functional or supportive reading, developing reading-based clubs, or developing, for example, a self-help offer. Project grants can also support health and wellbeing projects that promote healthy living, combat loneliness, and reduce health-related inequalities. And of course, there's the Universal Library Offer for Information and Digital, which could focus on libraries providing quality information and digital support, as well as working with innovative technology. And these might have a creative focus, but under this time-limited priority, You don't have to have a cultural or creative element if that's what aligns best with your priorities as a library service. Next slide. So in terms of how much you can apply for, we can have applications for up to £30,000. In this case, the application form is shorter and a little lighter touch, and you can expect a decision on whether you're successful in about 8 weeks. For grants of over 30k, but less than 100, the decision can take up to 14 weeks. We've also got 3 strategic strands of project grants at the moment that might be of relevance to libraries. So there's major projects, which is for ambitious, high quality projects of scale. So that's with projects of 100k and over. But there's also place partnership projects that for consortia that can deliver a step change in cultural opportunities in a place. So libraries could be part of a consortium or the leader of it. And lastly, the touring project strand is for taking work to 2 or more locations, and this is for applications of 30,000 and above. So for these specific 3 strategic strands, it requires an expression of interest to determine whether you'll be invited to apply for a full application. And the time from submitting the expression of interest to getting a full decision can be up to 6 months. So that requires a bit of prior planning. And a note on national portfolio organisations who are generally not able to apply for project grants except for the strategic strands. But if you are a libraries MPO, and I know we've only got one in the West Midlands, but they can apply for projects at any level, providing they're focused on the non-creative aspects of the Universal Library Office, including digital projects. With all of these, it's best to have a chat with your library's relationship manager about your ideas. Next slide, please. So before we go on to look at the application process in a bit more detail, I'll just touch on our 10-year strategy, which is called Let's Create. It's available on our website, but you don't need to read it in full to make an application of 30,000 and under. You should read the strategy for 30,000 and over applications though, and it's required for projects over 100k. You can see here that there's 3 outcomes on Let's Create. The first is creative people, which is about enabling everybody to develop and express creativity. The second is cultural communities, which focuses on places and communities and making them thrive through a collaborative approach to culture. And this is the area that libraries might find work best for them. And lastly, there's a creative and cultural country, and that supports England's cultural sector to be innovative, collaborative and professional. So this might include things like professional development. So in our application form, you'll have to select which outcomes your project fits with. Let's Create also talks about our 4 investment principles, which you can see on the bottom of the slide there, and they can help to build successful projects. All of the applications need to focus on inclusivity and relevance and consider that in what you contribute to us. And over 30k applications should focus on all of the investment principles listed there. Next slide, please. So this is some detail on what the application form looks like. So applications are made by our online application portal, Grantium, and you can register to use this via our website, which also contains some support on how to use it. And you can contact our customer services team for more on that as well. So the application form has got 4 sections, and the questions vary a little depending on the amount that you apply for, but the structure is overall the same. So firstly, we ask about your project, what it focuses on, what you want to do and why. We also ask about why the project should happen now and how you'll know if you've achieved what you set out to do. The second section is people and communities, which helps us to understand who is going to experience the project, where it will happen, and how you'll make your project inclusive and relevant to those experiencing it. This is also the place where you can give evidence about who will experience the project and how you'll engage them. And this is where the inclusivity and relevance investment principle comes in. You address that in this section. Thirdly, the third section is your planning, which is about showing how you'll successfully manage the project, the timetable, the budget, and what other people or organisations will be involved with and how you'll address any risks or challenges. You don't have to have managed the project before, but you'll need to be able to demonstrate that you've thought about how you and any partners will do it successfully. And we recognise that partners can be really useful for adding capacity, bringing skills, expertise, resources and contacts. So do think about that when you're developing a project. And here you'll see that for projects over 30k, you'll also need to consider ambition, quality and dynamism, and environmental responsibility investment principles. You'll also have to answer about you and your organisation in the final section, and this is collecting information about characteristics. You'll be pleased to know there's an offline version of this form, so you can have a little look through before you try to do it on Grantium. Next slide, please. Thank you. Quick note on match funding. So match funding is income from sources other than Arts Council. So this might be, for example, a cash contribution from the local authority, from another funder, or from ticket sales. Or it might be support in kind, which is donated resources to your project. So room hire is an easy example of this. We do still encourage applicants to find 10% or more match funding if they can, but it's not mandatory, and we'll still consider applications that don't have any cash match funding. In this case, you'll need to tell us more about why your project doesn't have any, so we can have some context to bear in mind when the project is appraised. So now we'll look at how, sorry, next slide. Thank you. It's how we make a decision on funding a project. So we've got two criteria for project grants now. The first is, how does it make a difference? And the second is, does it have achievable outcomes? So you'll see on this slide, this is the focus on the first one. How will your project help to make a difference? So some of the things we consider here are the creative or cultural idea behind the project, its ambition, and whether the project is likely to realise that ambition. We also want to know the difference that it's going to make through the project, and we want to know how people and community will experience the activity, how they'll be involved or feel included, and whether the information about the community or place has informed the project, i.e., is it relevant, is there a demand or a need? Next one, please. The second criteria is about how your project is likely to achieve what you want it to. So this is about understanding your plans to deliver the application or the project successfully, and we'll think about whether there's appropriate partnerships in place to help you deliver the activity, if the budget or level of match funding is appropriate, whether any risks have been identified and mitigated against, and whether the project is generally realistic and well planned. This includes the timeline being about right, marketing and engaging your audiences being appropriately considered. And as before, if you're applying to over 30k, we'll also think about how you're using the investment principles to develop your project. Next slide, please. This one just sets out our priorities for project grants at the moment, and they're based on data to ensure that we address inequalities and fund a diverse range of people and projects. So we aim to support underrepresented groups, and we're also keen to fund projects in our priority places. There's a full list of these on our website, but at the moment in the Midlands, they are Dudley, Nuneaton and Bedworth, Sandwell, Walsall and Wolverhampton. We've also periodically we have time limited priorities, and these to address gaps, specific gaps identified in what we fund. So as you know now, one of our time limited priorities is currently public libraries applying for projects to deliver against the Universal Library Offers. And this means that we target our resources and advice giving to help make libraries to make strong applications. And it also means that we can prioritise funding good quality library applications when we come onto our decision making. Next one. So this slide gives an overview of our decision making process. After you submit an application, we do eligibility and risk checks. And for applications of over 30k, we write an appraisal. Then the whole application, if it's under 30k, or the appraisal of that application, if it's over 30k, goes to our decision panels, and that takes place within your local Arts Council area. Now, these might not necessarily involve a relationship manager, so it's important to make your application as strong and as clear as possible, and not to make assumptions about what decision makers might know, particularly about a library or community context. Project grants is a really competitive fund, so we always do receive more good applications than we can fund. But if your application isn't funded, you can reapply and you can address any areas for funding that might have been identified. Next slide, please. So access support, we want to make our funding accessible to everybody, and we've got a variety of resources for that. On our website, all the guidance is available in various formats, BSL, audio, easy read, and there's some videos available. We can also pay support workers if you experience barriers at the application stage, and we can fund personal access costs for successful applicants to support the work during the project. Have a look at the website for more on that, and we've got an access support team that you can speak to as well. Next slide. If you'd like to know a bit more about project grants, then everything can be found on our project grants landing page. These have got everything you need to apply, including guidance in all formats and lots of different information sheets, including a library specific one. Some of them are listed above there. We've also got a newly updated libraries supporting libraries webpage that's got broader examples about our work with libraries and some examples that might be useful. And finally, then next slide. This is just some contacts. So you can get more information and advice from our customer services team, who can help with questions about eligibility or the Grantium application portal, or from me, your library's relationship manager. and I can help you with advice on the development of your project ideas. My email's above, so do get in touch or ask some questions today if you have any. Thanks very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I'm just going to Alice back that on me. Kate, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for talking us through all of that. And what I'm going to do now, very clunkily, is take you off spotlight. Bear with me 1 second.
Thanks.
And thank you. And now I'm going to add Jill Brown. Spotlight. Lovely. There we go. Hi, Jill. So Jill is joining us today from Library On. I'm going to remove myself from the spotlight, and I'm just going to get your presentation up. Give me 2 seconds, Jill, and I will be with you shortly.
Thanks,
Jill,
Jamie.
do you want to introduce yourself while I do this?
Yeah, super smooth. Hello, everyone. I'm Jill Brown. I'm the Digital Grants Manager for the Library On project, which is a project that's funded by Arts Council England and supported by the British Library. So I'm a woman in her mid-40s, and I've got shoulder-length curly brown hair, and I'm wearing a black polo neck and a green cardigan. And I am going to talk to you very briefly about what Library On is. And I'm going to explain our grants programme and community of practice. And then I'm going to have a quick look at what makes a good grant application, offer some top tips, and then delve into a couple of case studies to give you a bit of a flavour of our programme and provide some possible project ideas, things that you might want to consider for your own service. So next slide, please. So, very quickly, Library On's North Star goal is to increase physical and digital visits to libraries. So we aim to connect libraries and the people who could benefit from them. And we do that in a number of ways. We go to the next slide. So we have 4 essential parts to our project. So we've got our Library On website, which showcases all the brilliant things that libraries offer and includes a library finder that enables visitors to the site to go on, enter their postcode, and to find their nearest library. We've also been working with Newcastle libraries on catalogue integration, and they work with PTFS, so we've been doing some work around that. And we're currently exploring special collections working with Nottingham libraries as a pilot project. We also undertake user research, so we test out what people think of the site. We ask them what they would most like to see, what is useful to them, and we make sure that we get input every step of the way. We also have a content section where we create content by talking to users and libraries and filming people in library services, again, to showcase what they offer and to focus on how users interact and benefit from those offers. So we're running an online marketing campaign to help demonstrate this. And then finally, number 4 is the grants programme, which supports libraries to increase their digital users and supports them to engage digitally in different ways, as well as encouraging people to come into the physical space. So through this project, we kind of have a number of ways that we communicate with the library sector, but we also communicate more widely with the general public. So we put together a monthly newsletter and we run a monthly drop-in session where we share what we've been working on, and we quite often showcase the work of our grantees. And the next one is actually on Monday at 2 p.m. And we've got Gloucestershire talking about their project to create a new website. So at the end of this presentation, there'll be an email address. If you would like to sign up to that drop-in, then you'd be very welcome. So we go to the next slide, please. So the grants programme. Our grants programme is actually now closed. We had 2 rounds, and at this time we haven't got any plans to do future rounds, but never say never. But the aim was to improve the online presence and increase digital discoverability in public libraries. And we designed this programme following consultation with public libraries on the different kinds of digital projects that they'd like funding for and to help support their digital development needs. So we go to the next slide, tell you just a very quick bit about the programme. So it was open to public library services in England. It was a capital funding award capital funding awards for projects to enable digital discoverability and to enhance digital library offers. And we awarded just over 1.5 million over 2 rounds, and we supported a total of 48 projects. And through that, we've supported 81 services. So a pretty good percentage of the overall library services in England. We were fairly unusual that we had no requirement for match funding. And projects could apply for between 10 and 70 grand in round 1, and then between 10,000 and 30,000 in round 2. That's just a very quick overview. If you go to the next slide. We also, as part of the grants programme, run a community of practice, which is ongoing. And the idea with our community of practice is to bring grantees together, as well as the wider library sector, bring them together to share ideas, share best practice, to talk about project progress, and just to kind of swap ideas about different digital projects. As part of that, we've run a series of expert sessions put forward by the sector, which are available to watch on our website. And these are tailor-made to libraries and have included topics such as telling stories with data, accessible websites and user journeys, digital inclusion and social media. And we've got some more sessions in the pipeline, so we'll be publicising those very soon. And we also have a base camp, which you are very welcome to join, which shares, as I said, kind of shares that sort of information between services, but it's also a bit of a messaging board and general calls out for information. So you can email hello@libraryon.org to ask to be added to that, and that email address will come up at the end of the presentation. If we go to the next slide, please. So what does a good application look like? So I was thinking about this with Library On grants in mind, although I hope that this information will also be relevant to whichever funding stream you might think of applying for. Some of it is fairly obvious, and if you're a bit of a seasoned applier for grants, then it might just be kind of stuff that you already know. But if you're just dipping your toe into applying for applications for the first time, then I'm hoping it will be useful for you. So if we go to the next slide. So my first kind of top tips, I guess, is about stating clearly what the project is about, which sounds pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people don't say exactly what it is that they want money for. So my first tip is to be specific. So you need to tell the person reading the application exactly what it is you are going to spend the funding on. So, for example, someone might say, we will create digital assets to enhance our website and attract new users. Whereas if they actually said, we will upgrade our website using software from our LMS provider to make it more accessible for existing and new users to access our service, and we will focus on attracting young families, and we will work with X organisation to do this. That second one is pretty much kind of more in-depth and tells you exactly what it is the project will comprise of. And sometimes that detail can be lacking in an application. So you need to try to include as much relevant information as you can, with space allowing. And I know word and character counts can be fairly brutal on funding applications. However, you need to try and express it very clearly and succinctly and within the base allowing. Which leads on to my next point. You need to say what the funding will be spent on. So saying what the money will be spent on and then reflecting this clearly in your budget helps that person reading your application understand exactly how that money is going to be allocated. So it might also help in classifying your application at the funder's end. And in some cases, it might help to define whether or not your activity actually meets the aims of the fund that you're applying to. You don't have to include quotes. They're not always a requirement for funding applications. However, it seriously helps to do some research into how much things are actually going to cost rather than just providing rough estimates. And this helps you to apply for what exactly it is that you need, and you don't end up with too many too little money at the end or an underspend at the end of the project. So at the Library On grants programme, we really don't want to give, we don't want projects to have to give any money back. So we'd like it all to be spent. So try to be kind of really clear on and do your research on how much things are going to cost. And if you're applying for digital equipment, be precise about what it is and how many of the thing it is that you want, how many you're going to purchase. So be specific. If you're including match funding, it would be very helpful for you to say whether or not this is confirmed. And it isn't always an issue if it isn't confirmed. For example, if it's something like box office income. However, if it's something that could be confirmed at point of application, then that would be useful. And it also helps to give information to the funder about the likelihood of that match funding eventually being confirmed. So kind of saying what the relationship is with the person who's giving you that match or the organisation that's giving you the match is useful. And the final thing on the slide is to be clear on what the outputs are. So this kind of links to that first point on being specific. However, it's really useful to kind of say what that funding will enable you to do, what will happen as a result of that funding, what are those outputs? So just being really clear what will happen as a result of the project, what will be produced at the end of the project, and what the result will be. We go to the next slide. So teamwork makes the dream work. Ideally, projects that cover a certain period of time or work to get different audiences involved tend to have good partnerships at their core. So again, for the Library On grant programme, partnerships weren't a requirement for services. However, those applications that were able to demonstrate that they were working with other organisations or even other partners within the library or the local authority actually tended to be the stronger applications. So for examples from the Library On grants programme, we had partnerships within local authority. So for example, libraries working with their finance team, working with their comms team to kind of promote what it was they were doing, really tended to be stronger and were able to kind of show what the benefit was going to be and how they were going to attract people into their libraries, as opposed to those libraries that were trying to do it all on their own without any partnerships. And likewise for external partnerships. So to help kind of generate audiences and to kind of get new people into the library, those applications that had partnerships with charities, for example, were able to kind of show how they were going to increase usership of the library from certain groups. So it was really kind of evident from the applications that those people working in partnerships, those were the better applications. Within the application, you want to talk about what the partner will bring to the project and why they are a good fit. And also, partnerships can help spread the word about your project. They can help share outcomes from your work with the wider sector. So funders always like projects that can go that bit further as it spreads the benefit and investment. So sharing what you've learned in creating something or any other findings from research you've done, how could that help others, and who are you going to work with to kind of share what it is that you've done and who else could possibly benefit from it. So we go to the next slide. Again, another seemingly obvious point here, but read the aims of the fund and make sure you demonstrate how your project meets them. So you would be surprised how many applications don't say how their project is actually going to deliver against the aims of a funding programme. So in our programme, the feedback reason we used most often for unsuccessful projects at the expression of interest phase was that applicants hadn't addressed the aims, or perhaps they'd focused on one aim, but then they'd missed out the other. So that's a really important point. But when talking about how you meet the aims of the fund, don't forget the how. So the what is very important. So what the project is, but how you are going to practically accomplish it is also very important to demonstrate that your idea isn't only brilliant, but it's also feasible to deliver. So, for example, saying, by purchasing Hublets, we will attract new users to the library. That is a good statement, but you now need to underpin that with details on how they will be attracted. For example, we will work with partners in the town to promote the new Hublets through their channels. We will utilise ours and our partners' social media, etc. We'll work with the local authority. So it might be of real need to the library users, Hublets, but if no one knows about it and you're not going to promote it, then the benefit is likely to be limited, and someone reading your application is going to think the benefit is likely to be limited. So if we go to the next slide. So some more kind of top tips. I've gone for some general top tips, and then I've tried to get a bit more digitally specific. So next slide, please. So some general top tips. Get it read by a fresh pair of eyes. So ask someone who doesn't know your project to read the application. Does it make sense to them? Can they tell what your project is about? What questions do they ask which aren't answered clearly in your proposal, or what could be more clearly articulated? As Kate said, don't assume anything. So you know what you mean, and those in your service probably know what you mean. However, do people outside your service know? So that fabulous project that you've been working on, which is linked to this new application, isn't necessarily something which the person reading your application is going to know about. That said, because this is the library world, they might. However, you don't want to take the risk, so clearly explain everything. Is there enough people power to deliver the project? So given capacity tends to be in short supply, you might want to consider including freelancers or additional staff costs in your budget to ensure that you can accomplish the project without overstretching yourself. So for digital projects, it might also be worth using it as a digital development opportunity for colleagues. Can they either work with that external person to skill themselves up in creating and using digital assets, or could they shadow them? That is definitely a consideration. So kind of making sure that you've got enough resource and capacity. Give yourself plenty of time, which can be pretty tricky if you've just spotted an opportunity with a deadline that is tomorrow or next week. However, ideally, you're aiming for time to plan the application well, develop any partnerships, line up sources of match funding, and if really fortunate, you'll be able to confirm those sources of match. This can go slightly out of the window when funding deadlines and delivery times are tight. And we certainly didn't have a very long time for projects to be completed in. However, you need to get your good time to get your ducks in a row. And then if you aren't successful in the first time round, you have time to reapply if needed. Next slide, please. Just try ignore my dog whining in the background. So a few digital library specific points. So get colleagues on board sooner rather than later. If you're operating within local authorities, the majority of services are, make sure to speak to those teams you need to work with before submitting your application. There can be different levels of sign-off required, so it's a good idea to prime colleagues way in advance. So, for example, you might need to sign off capital expenditure that has to go through a finance team or a board. Make sure that is done before you submit your application. And whether you might need to consider restrictions around procurement that need to be negotiated. So that's one consideration. Find out how they can help. We have learned the importance of engaging relevant corporate colleagues at the earliest opportunity. As a result of these engagements, we have also learned how our corporate digital service colleagues can support in developing our messages and broadening our reach, said one of our grantees. Also, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. So find out what other services have done before you. Can you learn from them? Can you share ideas? Can you pass on supplier recommendations? This happened across some of our grantees who were really kind of keen to share the details of organisations they'd worked with. So that was then able to kind of like benefit other library services. Pick a good time for delivery. If you need to film in your space, for example, if you're making a virtual tour, it should be light outside and the space relatively empty. This can be tricky to achieve in the dead of winter or during a busy summer period when the library is busy or when people are on leave who might be involved in project delivery. Also, you might not want all the Christmas decorations up when you want to create a neutral space. And this came up a few times in our monitoring forms for digital filming projects. Finally, on that slide, who owns the rights? A number of our projects came unstuck when they hadn't agreed with a third party how images would be used. So if you're putting together kind of digital images or videography, make sure that you're clear on who owns the rights. Or if you want to share them, that it doesn't come with a hefty fee. So just be clear on what the deal is. Next slide, please. I'm aware that we are approaching time, so I'm just going to give you a quick sense of types of projects that we supported and how services went about delivering them. As mentioned, as we don't have any more planned rounds for Library On funding, but as Kate mentioned, there is a time-limited priority for libraries to apply for projects delivering against the universal offers. So you might be inspired by the following projects, or even if you're not inspired, you might want to check out what you can apply for under those universal offers. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk to you about Camden Library. So Camden Libraries partnered with the RNIB to make digital books more accessible to blind and partially sighted users. The project wanted to connect with blind and partially sighted users in Camden to make listening to digital projects more accessible. The RNIB identified through research that blind and partially sighted users are twice as likely to be digitally excluded as opposed to the general population. The project was awarded £41,200, and that went towards the magnification software for library PCs, the software development costs, and for staff costs related to creating the project. And RNIB supplied the Envoy Connect devices, which are those little blue, devices you can see on that slide, which is a very simple to use audiobook player that can hold up to 50 books. And books are downloaded to the device via BorrowBox and Libby app on a PC. And as a result of the project, all libraries now have the right software and hardware to make computers accessible to blind and visually impaired users, and the library teams have been trained in how to use it. So that training means they can help someone download ebooks onto the Envoy Connect device, and people who work in those libraries now feel more confident to support users with a visual impairment. And they've also kind of been able to support visually impaired users to kind of access other digital services within their library. So they're, for example, setting up a reading group for blind and partially sighted users. So there's been a kind of massive knock-on effect as part of this project, and staff now feel much more confident in supporting and working with blind and partially sighted visitors to their library. If we go to the next slide, thank you. A very quick canter through Darlington Libraries. So Darlington applied for to enhance its new capital refurbishment, and when Darlington Library reopened, they had these new digital elements to go live with. So we supported them with a virtual tour, some videography, and some augmented reality within their space. They were successful with £30,000, and as it was a capital fund, it was allocated entirely to creating those digital assets. They had a 5.5-month delivery period, although prior to submitting their full application, they'd already discussed the project with their website provider, their LMS provider, and colleagues from across the local authority, as well as the finance team. So within that 5-month period, they were able to sort of get going straight away. And they just recruited their VT, videography, and AR teams, all of them different companies, who were able to deliver within that 5.5-month period. And the application was very clear on who would be delivering what and how they would work with internal partners. So the application provided clear assurances that the project was feasible to deliver, and there was real clarity on how the project would deliver against our aims. So they've ended up with new assets which showcase the space and enable deeper digital engagement. And not only did the activity showcase library assets and space, the benefit was wider through connecting with heritage of the area, and also there was a particular focus on STEM activity for younger users, which came through the AR part of the project. This was a really good opportunity to maximise digital engagement for the library, as evidenced in their increased digital engagement. When they submitted their monitoring report, they were able to really show us what the benefit had been and kind of how that had increased footfall. So the library reopened in September last year, and from December to March this year, just in 4 months, they experienced 89,000 online visits. And this was up from an annual average of 44,000. So essentially their online traffic had increased by 600%. And the virtual tours had generated just under 54,000 views in 6 months since they launched. And they were also able to show how that translated into more people visiting their library. So they were able to show that there was a 100% increase in people visiting the library in person. So that was a real success story in terms of a digital project. That was a bit of a canter through. If we go to the last slide, that's just to say thank you. And if you would like to become part of community of practice, or you would like to sign up to the Library On newsletter, or you would like to sign up for a drop-in, just email hello@libraryon.org and we can add you to our mailing list and make sure that you're connected. Well, thank you. I'll hand you back to Jamie.
Perfect. Jill, that was amazing and so clear. Thank you so much for that. Let me just clear my screen. Apologies. And everything's gone black. That's always helpful. Can you still hear me? I'm hoping so. Yes, you can. Fantastic. Right. I am going to now hand over to John White from The Space.
Thanks so much, Jamie. I'm John. I'm Chief Operating Officer of The Space. I am a white man in my late 40s with receding brown hair and round glasses. And I am just going to, if I find the right buttons, I'm driving myself. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully share my presentation. Everyone see that all right?
Right. Yeah, that's perfect.
Good. And what I want to do in the last few minutes, and slightly tight on time, is just give you a little bit of a canter, primarily through that notion of partnership, which Jill was mentioning. So The Space, for those of you who don't know, is we were set up by the Arts Council England and the BBC about 10 years ago, and we're what's known in Arts Council terms as an investment principal support organisation. So we help support a range of cultural organisations with those 4 investment principles that Kate mentioned. And one of the ways we do that is through partnering on various projects. This strand, these webinars, are in fact one of our support activities. But what I wanted to briefly talk about today is a partnership we had with Coventry Library Service over the last 2 or 3 years around the Digital Spaces programme. So that was a large-scale programme. So in the context of the different sort of programme strands, this was what at the time was the Arts Council called National Activities Project Grants, now a major project grant. So at the top end of the range of scale that Kate was talking about, was predominantly funded by Arts Council England. But in terms of that matched funding aspect, we also secured funding from the British Film Institute for a strand of activity within it. So the 2 funders between them were covering the range of activities. And the core partners, we worked with the Library Service around the design of the programme. So we were the sort of strategic delivery partner, but between us, we then pulled together partnerships with the City of Culture, Coventry City of Culture, which was running in parallel to this programme, with Libraries Connected, who helped us with the dissemination to other library services of what we learned from the programme, and then BBC Archives and the Media Archive for Central England, who contributed their archives to some of the digital creative projects. Virtual reality content sat at the heart of it, using a lot of material that the BBC had commissioned, but also pulling internationally on virtual reality content that people could experience in 4 of Coventry's libraries. There was an element of community engagement where we brought communities together to work with digital creatives to create projects that were then showcased in the central library, and that included creating short films in 180 immersive that could be put onto the headsets so that people could experience content from their own region. And we drew on those archive partners to supplement and contribute to those projects. And then across all of this, we were busy training librarians in Coventry with the digital skills necessary to run and plan and deliver the project and engage with the public. So there was that skills element as well. And hopefully you can already see how that's mapping into the funder priorities that Kate's outlined, but also we were looking at the priorities that the BFI had for its funding programs and making sure those activities aligned with that. And part of the benefit of these kind of partnerships is that each party is bringing some expertise. So as a library service, I think Coventry would admit it didn't have a huge amount of experience with designing digital programs. So we were able to support with that. They were the ones leading and managing the bid and applying to the Arts Council for the money and overseeing the funding spend. Obviously, we were using the library venues and we were relying on librarian time. So that was part of the in-kind contribution. And we pulled together a project steering group with all of those partners, and it was Coventry Library Service that managed that process as well. And then our role was to come in and apply our digital expertise. So we have a range of freelancers and core staff across the UK, all with different experiences and expertise that informed the programme design. We managed a lot of the day-to-day budget operations. And because we're not a council, we can be more agile as a small not-for-profit in the sort of procurement and contracting processes. And we were working with suppliers that we'd got a lot of prior experience working with. So that provides a level of reassurance and comfort to funders who are looking at the risks around programme delivery. And again, we were engaged in that digital training and support for the library service and the librarians. And we have, as one of our associates, a qualified librarian who's got a lot of training and delivery expertise. And evaluation is also a key part of what we did with the City of Culture partnership is plug into their wider evaluation framework and make sure that the way we were measuring our impacts aligned with what the City of Culture was doing as a whole. And we also looked at best practice actually internationally in other library services around how to measure impact of these kind of projects. In terms of top tips, thinking about your grant applications, quite a lot of this has been touched on already, so I won't duplicate, but one of these bullet points I pull out is just thinking about the legacy and about what happens after the funding has ended and how you continue. And particularly with digital projects, it can be quite often relatively straightforward, obviously competitive, but to get money to buy equipment. But then if you haven't got a plan for how you're going to use that equipment in the medium to long term, you can find you have kit literally sitting on shelves doing nothing at the end of a project. And so it's obviously great in terms of value for public money if you can just think about what that ongoing activity might look like and how you might support it in other ways. And then there's always a bit of a cost benefit analysis. And for me, this is when you're thinking about a bid, thinking about what I call the hidden costs and how you factor those into what's the scale of funding you apply for, whether you apply for funding or not. So it can be quite time consuming to pull together these applications, particularly if you've got to bring in different partners and understand their needs and capabilities and your own. So just think about that a little bit. Once you've secured the funding, assuming you're successful, then you may have procurement processes to manage. You've got those ongoing relationships to manage. So make sure you build in time and capacity in the funding you're applying for so that you're not sort of digging into your own pockets to try and make that work. And there's always a bit of time to manage and monitor and evaluate. That's partly about being able to report to funders at the end of the project, but it's also about having the capacity to step back, see what you've learned, share that information with others and think about what you might do next as a result of those insights. I've talked a little bit about legacy, but particularly with digital, there are things like ongoing hosting costs, software and content licenses that might be annual, that might need renewing. And if you're buying hardware, thinking about what you might need to do to maintain that in the medium term. As a very rough rule of thumb, if you're buying digital technology, you'll know this from computers and so on, they can often be obsolete in a sort of 2 to 3 year time frame. And if you're investing in things that are more cutting edge, like VR or augmented reality technology, sometimes that life cycle can be even shorter. So just bear that in mind. But there are also benefits. There's a lot of benefits from learning by doing, and funders are very responsive to that idea that you don't necessarily know what it is you're going to learn. There will be mistakes along the way. It's about having a process where you can honestly share and build on what you have learned and in terms of what you go on to do next. Those partnerships can be really valuable in the long term in terms of future activities and relationships. You may build partnerships where then you think you could jointly apply to fund a subsequent project. And of course, you've then got an evidence base of the success of the initial project and that initial partnership that will give that future application some credibility. You will learn the skills and become increasingly confident around grant management. You may come across more streamlined ways of working. I mentioned things like Basecamp earlier and ways of sharing information. And of course, hopefully you will be learning new ways to engage and bring people into the library and keep them as engaged library users. And by illustration of that, just a few quick stats that we got from the Coventry project, which we are actually currently using as an evidence base to write another funding application for an expanded national version of this and to apply for funding for that. So having this evidence helps us know what succeeded and that really positive feedback, but it's also a great stepping stone onto what happens next. So that's a very whistle-stop tour, which has given you, Jamie, a few minutes to play with the questions. I'll just stop sharing.
Unmute myself. Perfect. Thank you so much. We don't really have that much time for too many questions. And I can't see that there's any dropped in there. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to remove the spotlight on myself, and hopefully that will bring everyone into the frame. There we go. And I suppose my final question for each panelist would be, for services that have great ambition, that have an idea for a project, but they're not quite sure where to start, what might be your kind of top tip or top tips of kind of where to go to begin?
Shall I drop in just with I think my top tip is effectively phone a friend. I mean, try and find someone else in the sector who's done something similar and talk to them about their process and where they got started. And also do talk to the funders. I'm sure Kate will say the same thing, but they have outreach. It's very easy to speak to someone who Arts Council on the library side, Kate or colleagues, and get their advice and feedback in terms of understanding the process. So yeah, talk to people and ask questions.
Perfect. Kate or Jill, anything to add to that?
That's very on message, actually. I think that was 2 of the 3 that I had. Absolutely, with partners, don't feel you have to do it all yourself. I think the other thing for libraries specifically is make the most of what libraries have. What libraries have that potentially other applicants to project grants, for example, don't have, if you're a theatre or an arts organisation, is that you don't have that specific knowledge of your community. So use the evidence of who's in your community, use the expertise that your library staff have got on how to reach them actively, and make the most of that in any library application. You're not just saying that you know that there's a group that you'd like to reach, you're saying that you know there's this group, you know they're interested in this particular activity, and one of our librarians knows how to reach them. We've got these partnerships in place, so really make sure that you evidence that clearly in any application.
That's pretty much what I was going to say as well. I mean, John's point definitely. Kind of talk to other services about your idea. Someone has done it before, or kind of similar to what you want to deliver, but also thinking about who you could work with to deliver. So if you don't have the expertise within your service, or you want to do something that's kind of across the community, try to find someone else that is in that community or is doing something that in the area that you want to work in, and bring them on board.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And that is time. That is bang on 4 o'clock. So amazing timing. Thank you, panelists. And thank you, all of you, as well, for attending, and for those watching on demand.